They carried Frank's rocking chair to the garage like it was a broken appliance. My son held one end, his wife held the other, and they laughed the whole way down the porch steps. I watched from the kitchen window, my hands wrapped around a mug that had gone cold an hour ago. Neither of them looked back. Neither of them thought to. Frank had built that chair himself the summer before we bought the lake house. Sanded every inch of it, stained it twice because the first color wasn't quite right. He sat in it every morning for 19 years, drinking his coffee, watching the mist come off the water. After he passed, I sat in it myself. Not every day, but on the hard days, yes. On the days when the house felt too quiet and his absence too loud, I would sit in that chair and let the wood remember him for me. Now it was wedged between a broken lawnmower and a stack of plastic storage bins. I set down the mug. I didn't say a word. Not then. Not yet. The lake house had been ours since 1987. Frank and I found it on a Sunday drive through the hills outside of Knoxville, a white clapboard, 2-story, with a wraparound porch and a dock that needed replacing. We paid for it ourselves, dollar by dollar, the way people used to do things. When our son Daniel was born, we brought him home to our house in the city. But summers always meant the lake. That was where he learned to swim, where he had his first fishing rod, where he came running to me with scraped knees and sunburned shoulders, and I kissed both without being asked. I thought, when Frank died 3 years ago, that I might sell it. Friends said as much. Too much to manage alone. Too many memories in one place. My sister called it unhealthy. But I couldn't. The lake house was Frank's last project, his last full restoration. New roof, new windows, refinished floors. He had finished it the spring before his diagnosis, as if some part of him already knew. So I kept it. I came out on weekends when the city felt too tight. I tended the garden, restocked the pantry, sat on that porch and watched the water, and told myself I was fine. Then Daniel called. He and Sandra had been renting an apartment in Nashville for 6 years. His second business had just collapsed. Sandra had left her job to start something online that hadn't started. Tyler, 17, was getting into trouble at his school. Brooke, 14, had switched friend groups twice and was struggling. Daniel's voice on the phone sounded smaller than I'd heard it since he was a boy. "Mom, we need somewhere to land, just for a little while, until we figure things out." I said yes. Of course I said yes. He was my son. The lake house had 4 bedrooms, a big kitchen, a yard that ran down to the water. There was room for all of them and more. What I did not say, what I did not think to say, because it felt unnecessary, because what mother should need to say such things to her own child was that the house was mine, that Frank and I had paid for it outright, that my name was on the deed, alone, the way it had been for 36 years. I did not say it because I assumed he already knew. I assumed it was understood. I was wrong about that. I was wrong about several things. The first month was nearly good. Sandra cooked dinners that were too spicy for me, but I ate them without complaint. Tyler mowed the yard without being asked, once. Brooke showed me how to use the photo app on my phone, sitting beside me on the porch swing, her head briefly on my shoulder. Daniel barbecued on Saturday evenings and called me over to taste things and said, "Doesn't that remind you of Dad's recipe?" And for a moment, it almost felt like we were a family again. But comfort shifts, the way lake water does in a wind. Slowly at first, then all at once. I noticed it in small things. The photos I had hung on the staircase, Frank at 30, Frank at 50, our wedding portrait, Daniel as a baby in his arms, were moved to the upstairs hallway, then to a box in the linen closet. Sandra said she was refreshing the space. She put up prints she ordered online. Clean lines, neutral colors, nothing personal. The house began to look like it belonged to someone else. My kitchen became a negotiation. I had always kept a particular order. Certain things in certain places, the cast iron skillet on the left burner, the cutting board beside the sink. the coffee on the second shelf where I could reach it without stretching. Within 2 months, everything had been reorganized. Sandra said she needed it to flow better. I found my cast iron in the back of a lower cabinet behind Tyler's cereal boxes. I didn't argue. I reorganized quietly and didn't mention it. The porch was next. Sandra bought new outdoor furniture. Sleek resin chairs, a long sectional sofa, a gas fire table. Modern things. Impersonal things. Frank's handmade chairs there had been 2. The rocker and a straight-backed chair he'd built the same summer were moved off the porch. The straight-backed one ended up in the corner of my bedroom. The rocker went to the garage. The day they moved it, I was standing at the kitchen window finishing my coffee, and I watched my son carry his father's chair away while his wife laughed about something she was reading on her phone. He didn't stop walking. He didn't set it down gently. He propped it against the garage wall with a careless thud I heard from inside. That was the moment something inside me stopped bending and began to harden. I had tried, twice, to speak to Daniel before that day. The first time was about the photos. I found the box in the linen closet by accident, looking for a towel, and I carried it downstairs and set it on the kitchen table and waited for him. "Mom," he said, when he came in and saw my face. "Sandra just wanted to brighten the place up. It's not personal." "It felt personal to me," I said. His father's photograph was in a box. He shifted his weight, looked at the floor. "She lives here too. She needs to feel at home." "And what about me?" I asked. He didn't answer that. He got himself a glass of water and changed the subject. The second time was 3 weeks later. I had come downstairs at 6 in the morning to find Sandra and Tyler eating breakfast at the table, and my chair, the one I always sat in, the one facing the window toward the water, occupied by a stack of Sandra's magazines and a basket of laundry she hadn't gotten to yet. I stood in the doorway for a moment. Sandra looked up. "Oh, good morning. There's coffee." I pointed gently at the chair. She blinked. "Sorry. Can you just grab the other one? We're right in the middle of something." Tyler didn't look up from his phone. I took the other chair. I drank my coffee with my back to the window. I did not say the thing rising in my throat. I went upstairs, sat on the edge of my bed, and stared at Frank's photograph on the nightstand. He smiled back at me with the easy confidence of a man who had never once doubted his own place in his own home. "What would you do?" I whispered to him. I already knew. Frank would have said something clear and quiet and final the very first day. He wouldn't have waited 3 months the way I had. But I am not Frank. I had always been the patient one, the soft one, the one who smoothed things over and let the small wounds close on their own. For 40 years, that quality had served me. Here, it was being used against me. The garage was where it changed. Not all at once, but standing at that window, watching Daniel walk away with his father's chair and not look back, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not anger exactly, clarity, the kind that comes when you stop making excuses for someone and simply see them. I went to my bedroom, opened the bottom drawer of my nightstand, and took out the folder I had put there 6 months before Daniel called. Inside was the deed to the lake house, a copy of my will, and a letter I had written to my lawyer after Frank's funeral, inquiring about my options if I ever wanted to sell. I had never sent the letter. I had never needed to. I held the folder in my lap for a long time. Then I put it back, closed the drawer, and went downstairs to make dinner. Not for them, for myself. The forgetting was gradual. The way erosion is gradual. You don't see it happening until the bank has collapsed. I stopped being invited to their evenings, not told to leave, just not included. Daniel and Sandra would sit on the new porch furniture after the kids went to bed, talking, laughing, the gas fire throwing orange light across the water. I would see it from my bedroom window. Sometimes I went down and stood in the doorway, and sometimes Sandra would say, "Oh, we were just about to come in." And they would, and the conversation would end. I stopped cooking for them after the night my cornbread was left untouched on the counter while they ordered pizza. Brooke made a face when I brought it out. Tyler said, "No offense, Grandma, but that looks like something from a history book." Sandra bit her lip the way she did when she was trying not to agree with something out loud. I covered it with a towel and brought 2 pieces upstairs to my room and ate them by the window while the pizza delivery driver's headlights swung across the lawn. I stopped mentioning Frank. Every time I did, something subtle happened. Eyes dropped, conversation pivoted. Sandra found something urgent to do in another room. Once, when I told Brooke a story about her grandfather at the lake, how he used to name the herons that came to the dock, called one of them Gerald for 3 summers running. She looked at me with a kind of patient, distant smile, the kind you give to someone whose stories you have decided are not for you. I watched myself become a boarder, something they lived around rather than with. The incident that ended it happened on a Saturday in October. The leaves were just turning, the lake the color of pewter in the morning light. I had been planning this for a week. I drove to the grocery in town, chose a good roast, the kind I used to make every Sunday, the kind Daniel had asked me to make at least a dozen times over the years. I seasoned it the night before and let it sit. I was at the stove by 8 in the morning. By noon, the house smelled like every Sunday of Daniel's childhood. Bay leaves and garlic and something deeper underneath, the smell of a house that knew it was loved. When they came downstairs, Sandra sniffed the air and said nothing. Tyler asked if there was anything to snack on. Brooke poured herself cereal and took it back to her room. Daniel paused in the kitchen doorway, looked at the roasting pan on the stove, and said, "That smells good, Mom." That's all he said. Then he went to the living room, turned on the television. I set the table myself. I found the cloth napkins Frank's mother had left us, the ones we only used for Thanksgiving. I put out the good plates. I made gravy from scratch, the way my own mother taught me, standing at her elbow when I was 9 years old and could barely see over the counter. When I called them to the table, there was a pause, then a shuffling. Then they appeared, one by one, with the shuffling reluctance of people who have already decided something. Sandra sat down, looked at her plate, looked at Daniel. "We were actually going to drive into town," she said carefully. "There's that new place everyone's been talking about." "It's already made," I said. I kept my voice even. "I know. And it looks lovely." She touched the edge of her napkin without picking it up. But we kind of had plans. Daniel didn't look at me. He poked at the roast with his fork, then set the fork down. "Mom, you could have checked with us first." I said nothing. Tyler reached across the table, picked up a slice of roast beef, took one bite, and then set it on the edge of his plate. "It's a little dry," he said. It was not dry. I knew it was not dry, but I did not say so. Brooke put nothing on her plate. Sandra pushed back from the table and began clearing her setting. "I'm going to change. We'll be back by 7. She leaned over and touched Daniel's shoulder. And he stood, too. And they carried their plates to the counter, full plates, untouched, and scraped the food into the trash, without a second look. I sat at that table alone. Tyler took his plate upstairs. Brooke followed. The door to the garage banged once, then Daniel's car started, and the sound moved away down the gravel drive and disappeared. The kitchen was very quiet. The candle I had lit guttered in a draft from the window. The cloth napkins sat folded, unused. The gravy had gone still in its dish. I reached across the table and blew out the candle. I didn't cry. I was past that. I sat there in the silence for a long time, the kind of silence that doesn't ask anything of you. And I thought about Frank's chair in the garage and my photos in the linen closet, and every small erosion of the last 18 months, and I felt them settle inside me like sediment. Then I got up, covered the roast with foil, washed the serving dishes, folded the cloth napkins, and put them back in the drawer where Frank's mother had always kept them. In my room, I opened the nightstand drawer. I took out the folder. I read the deed from the first line to the last. Dorothy Ann Whitfield. That was my name. That was the only name on those pages. I put the folder in my handbag, along with my checkbook, my ID, and a piece of paper with an address I had already looked up 3 weeks before. I had been waiting for myself to be ready. I was ready now. I did not sleep much that night, but the sleeplessness was different than it had been for months. It wasn't the hollowness of someone who has been made to feel small. It was the wakefulness of someone who has made a decision and can feel its weight and doesn't flinch. At 7 in the morning, I drove 40 minutes to the county seat. My lawyer's office was on the second floor of a red brick building above a print shop. I had used Robert Ellison twice before, once for Frank's estate, once for a property dispute with a neighbor 15 years ago. His secretary remembered me. She brought me coffee before I sat down. Robert looked older. We all did. He listened without interrupting while I explained the situation. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. "The deed is clean?" he asked. "Always has been," I said. "My name only." "Frank," never added Daniel. "And they've been residing there how long?" 18 months, I said. "No lease, no rental agreement." I allowed it verbally. He nodded slowly, the way experienced men nod when they're being careful. "You want to move forward with a formal notice to vacate." 30 days, I said. "Enough time to make arrangements." "Not a day more." He studied me. "Dorothy, this is your son." "I know who he is," I said. Something in my voice must have settled the question, because he reached for his pad and began writing. From the lawyer's office, I drove to the bank. I had a joint savings account I had opened with Daniel when he moved in, for shared household expenses, groceries, and utilities. My idea, meant to be practical, meant to feel like partnership. Over 18 months, the account had been used for things I had not intended. A weekend in Nashville, new tires for Sandra's car, a gaming console for Tyler that arrived in a large brown box and was never mentioned. I sat across from the branch manager, a calm young woman named Patricia who had helped me once before, and I told her I needed to close the joint account and transfer the balance to my individual account. She asked if there was a concern she should be aware of. I told her it was a family matter, and I had decided to manage my finances separately going forward. She didn't ask again. She processed it efficiently. I left the bank 40 minutes later with a cashier's check for my own money and a closed account. By noon, I was at the county clerk's office filing the paperwork Robert had prepared. The woman at the counter stamped and dated each page with the business-like steadiness of someone who processes the unraveling of family arrangements every single day. I signed where I was told to sign. I initialed where I was told to initial. I paid the fee in cash. Standing on the courthouse steps afterward in the thin October sunlight, I breathed slowly. The air smelled like fallen leaves and wood smoke from somewhere down the street. My knees ached the way they always did in the cold. I stood there anyway, breathing, feeling the weight of the folder in my hands. "Frank," I thought, "I wish you could see this." Not because it would please him that his son had come to this. No, Frank would have been heartbroken by that. But he would have been proud that I hadn't disappeared, that I had stood up. He always believed I was stronger than I let myself be. Maybe it just took losing him to find out. I drove home the long way, past the old diner where Frank and I used to stop after Sunday drives, now a cell phone store, past the elementary school, where Daniel had cried every morning for the first 2 weeks of kindergarten and held my hand so tightly my rings left marks. When I pulled into the gravel drive, Daniel's car was there. Sandra's too. The light in the kitchen was on. I sat in my car for a moment. Then I got out, straightened my coat, picked up my bag, and went inside. They were all in the living room. Daniel on the couch, Sandra beside him, Tyler sprawled on the floor with his headphones around his neck, Brooke reading something on her tablet. A comfortable Saturday afternoon. The kind that looked, from the outside, like a family at ease in their home. I set my bag on the entry table. I took out the envelope Robert had prepared and sealed, Daniel's name written on the front in my own handwriting. "Daniel," I said. He looked up, slightly startled. Something in my voice, maybe. "Hey, Mom, you okay?" I crossed the room and placed the envelope on the coffee table in front of him. He looked at it, then at me. "What is this?" "Open it," I said. He did. I watched his face as he read the first page. The color left it the way it leaves a room when someone switches off a lamp. Sandra leaned over to read. Her jaw tightened. The room went very quiet. Even Tyler pulled his headphones fully off. "Mom." Daniel's voice was low, careful. "This is an eviction notice." "Yes," I said. "You can't be serious." I sat down in the armchair across from them. Not the one Sandra had claimed with her throw blanket and her reading glasses. Mine. The one I had stopped sitting in because it had begun to feel borrowed. I sat in it now. "I'm completely serious," I said. "You have 30 days. The paperwork is filed with the county." Sandra stood up. "This is insane. We live here." "The deed to this property is in my name," I said. "It has been since 1987. You moved in 18 months ago, under an informal arrangement, because I am Daniel's mother, and I wanted to help my family. That arrangement is ending. Because of one dinner?" Sandra's voice rose. "Because we went out yesterday instead of eating your roast?" I looked at her steadily. "Not because of one dinner. Because of 18 months of small decisions that told me exactly what I was to this household. The photographs in a box. The chair Frank built, left in the garage without a word to me. Meals I cooked that were thrown in the trash. Mornings, when my seat at my own table was too inconvenient to clear." Daniel pressed his fingers to his forehead. "Mom, you should have said something sooner. If we'd known you felt this way." "I said something twice," I replied. Once about the photos, once in the kitchen when I had nowhere to sit. Both times I was told I was being too sensitive, that I needed to understand Sandra had to feel at home here too. I paused. I agreed with that, actually. She does need to feel at home, but so do I. And for 18 months, only one of us was allowed to. Brooke had set down her tablet. She was watching me with an expression I hadn't seen on her face before. Not the patient, distant look from the Heron story. Something more awake than that. Tyler said nothing. He looked at the floor. Daniel looked up at me. And for a moment, he was every age he had ever been. The boy on the dock. The teenager who called me from college when he was homesick. The man who stood at his father's grave and wept without sound. My heart pulled in two directions at once, the way it always had when I loved someone who was also causing me harm. "Where are we supposed to go?" he asked quietly. "I don't know," I said. "That is something you'll need to figure out. You have 30 days, and I'm not an unreasonable woman. If you need help, I will help you within reason. But you are leaving this house." Sandra made a sound I chose not to respond to. She walked out of the room. I heard her footsteps go upstairs. Then, the sound of a door. Daniel sat there holding the papers for a long moment. Then he put them back in the envelope, folded it once, and set it on the coffee table. He didn't say anything else. He got up and went upstairs too. The television was still on. Some Saturday program no one was watching. Brooke was still looking at me. After a moment, she said, very quietly, "I didn't know about Grandpa's chair." "I know you didn't," I said. She looked down. "I'm sorry, Grandma." I reached over and took her hand briefly. "That's not your fault." Tyler was still looking at the floor, his headphones in his lap. He didn't speak, but he also didn't leave. That, I decided, was something. The next 30 days were not comfortable. There is nothing comfortable about the settling of consequences. Sandra moved through the house with a fury that expressed itself in every cabinet door and every set of car keys slammed on the counter. Daniel went quiet, the same quietness he had always retreated to when he didn't know what to do. The kind that Frank used to say was Daniel's way of waiting for someone else to fix things. No one was going to fix this. There were boxes in the hallway by the second week. Tyler's things first, books and equipment, and the gaming console in its oversized box. Then Brooke's room, her posters rolled carefully, her shelf of small things wrapped in newspaper. She knocked on my door one evening to ask if she could keep calling me on the phone after they left. I told her of course she could. She hugged me, quick and hard, and went back to her packing. Sandra knocked on my door once. She stood in the doorway, not coming in, and said that she wanted me to know she had never intended to make me feel like a stranger in my own home. Her voice was even rehearsed. I believed that she believed it. "I know you didn't intend it," I said, "but intention and effect are different things." She nodded once and left. Daniel came to me on its 27th day. He sat on the edge of the chair in my room, the straight-backed one Frank had built, and he looked at his hands for a long time before he spoke. "I let it happen," he said finally. "The photos, the chair, all of it. I saw it, and I let it happen. I waited. I told myself you were adaptable, that you'd be fine, that it was easier if things went Sandra's way because otherwise there was conflict and I—" He stopped, swallowed. "I didn't want conflict." "I know," I said. "I'm sorry, Mom." The words were simple. They were true. I could hear the truth in them. And I had known my son long enough to know the difference between an apology that was meant and one that was meant to change something. "I know you are," I said. He looked up. "No," I said gently. "There isn't. You need to stand on your own. You always did. Your father knew that. I think I knew it too, and I let you avoid it because it was easier for me as well." He was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded, the way a man nods when he has accepted something that costs him. He stood, hugged me briefly, his chin on the top of my head the way he had done since he grew taller than me. And then he went back down the hall. On the 30th morning, I made coffee early. I sat at the kitchen table, my table, facing the window the way I had always preferred, watching the light come over the water. The lake was still in the early cold. A heron stood on the dock, motionless, looking at its own reflection. "Gerald," I thought. They left before noon, car by car, the crunch of gravel under tires going down the drive, and then the long silence after. I didn't watch from the window. I stayed at the table and let them go without ceremony, the way a house lets its seasons pass. When the last car had gone, I walked through every room. I touched the walls, the window frames, the banister that Frank had sanded and restained the spring before he got sick. I opened the linen closet and took out the box with the photographs. I brought it to the kitchen table and began going through them one by one. Frank, at 30, squinting into the sun, one hand raised to shade his eyes, laughing at something I had said from behind the camera. Our wedding day. Daniel, 10 years old, holding a bass nearly as long as his arm, the proudest face I had ever seen on a child. I hung the wedding portrait back on the staircase. I found places for all the others. Then I went to the garage. Frank's chair was where they had left it, tilted at an angle against the wall, gathering a thin coat of dust. I carried it back to the porch myself, slowly, my knees complaining on the steps. I set it where it had always been, facing the water, the view Frank had chosen for it without hesitation and never second-guessed. I went inside, poured a fresh cup of coffee, and brought it back out. I sat down in the chair, in the spot where the wood had worn smooth from years of use, and I looked at the lake. The heron was still on the dock. It didn't move when I came out, just turned its long neck slightly toward me, then back to the water. "Gerald," I said aloud. And for the first time in a long time, I laughed at myself, quietly, without anyone's permission. The morning smelled like leaves and cold water, and the last of summer folded away for another year. The chair creaked once beneath me, the way it always had, the way Frank had said was the sound of good wood settling. He said that every time it creaked, he made it sound like something to be proud of. I pulled my coat tighter, lifted the coffee to my lips, and let the quiet in. Not the hollow quiet of being forgotten in a house full of people, not the silence of someone who has learned to make herself small to avoid discomfort. This was a different kind. Earned, mine. The quiet of a woman who owns her own porch and her own chair and her own long view of the water and has stopped pretending otherwise. Respect is not something a family gives you automatically because you fed them and sheltered them and loved them before they knew how to ask for it. I know that now. My mother knew it. Frank knew it, which is maybe why he never had to learn it the hard way. I was slower to understand, but I understood it now. Standing in every signed page of those documents, in every word I had said calmly and finally in that living room, in every photograph back on the wall where it belonged. The heron lifted from the dock without warning, one great sweep of gray wings, and was gone across the water. I watched it until I couldn't see it anymore. Then I finished my coffee, went inside, and started making plans for how I wanted to live in this house. Mine, in name, in spirit, in every unshared morning from here forward. It was, I decided, a very good place to begin.